Hey guys, White Warlock here. This is going to be another deck guide video on the red-blue items deck. This time I'm going to talk about the Mulligan. I'm going to talk about every card and when to mulligan them and in which matchups. And I've divided these cards in four categories basically to make it a little bit simpler for you to see what you should mulligan when and when. But take into account that this is a general guideline and this can be different. Even if you've changed the deck, one card, it could change and it could change depending on how many inkables you have in your hand. Sometimes you want to keep inkables even if they are a always mulligan card because the rest of your hand is like perfect. So as I said, I've categorized these into four different categories. And first, I will talk about the most, the cards you want to see the most. And these five cards are basically the non-mulligan cards. You will almost never mulligan them unless you have like four of them. Popsicle is like one of the only ones I would probably keep all four of, depending on the rest of my hand. Um, and Hiram is a maybe three of the four for Mulligan, depending on the matchup. Sometimes you only need two, but you can always keep them as ink, obviously. And for the Queen and Scuttle, I would probably stop at two. And for Brawl, it really depends on the matchup. But in basically every matchup, Brawl is useful. And in some matchups, you want four, like Hyper Aggro or something. And in other matchups, maybe the Mirror, you only want two or three. But these five, I would never mulligan. Um, unless there's a very good reason or I'm playing against like a rogue deck where other cards are way too important for them to not have in my opening hand. Uh, yeah, these cards are just good. Keep them. Then for my second, I have three conditional cards that are most often keeps, but not always. So for Shield of Virtue and LeFou, these are basically interchangeable. If you have one, you probably mulligan the other, depending on your starting hand. Let's say you have no turn one play and you have a Scuttle in hand, you can mulligan LeFou and play the Shield on turn one. If you do have a turn two play, or you have two LeFous, you probably mulligan the Shield or use that ink, depending on what your hand looks like. Second LeFou is good with the Queen. If you have multiple LeFous but no queen, mill everything but one, I would say. In red purple, and in red purple, I would actually move the LeFou to the non-mulligan side, because you will probably need a turn two, especially on the draw against the Flynn, especially if on turn three you have no uh, queen and you're going for like a Sisu, a small Sisu or something. So against that matchup, I would say keep the LeFou against all the others, at least one, um, unless you have a shield, and the rest can go if you don't have a queen. For the Fishbone Quail, it's kind of depending on how your deck looks. I would say, sorry, not your deck, your hand. I would say if you have like an opportunity to play this on either turn three and ramp, let's say you have a Medusa, or you're gonna mill that, but let's say you draw a Medusa and then you can play uh, turn four Medusa by playing turn three Fishbone Quill. Because you have no other, like you have no Brawl or Queen, then you would definitely keep it. And maybe if you have a lot of card draw, let's say you have multiple Popsicles and Hirams, then you could probably also keep it. Uh, it's a little bit more of a mulligan card than the other two, but it is always a reasonable turn three play, especially against decks where you want to keep up with ink, like the mirror or blue steel. And yeah, you would most likely want it from a queen activation, but it's fine if you play it on turn three if you have nothing better to do. And as always, it's ink, so it's fine. Then I have five more cards that are more matchup specific. So, and Workshop. Workshop is also kind of matchup specific, but against green steel, it can be a good turn 3 play if you have a lot of items in your opening hand. And I generally keep it if the other five, if I would keep the other six, or other five, depending on what I mulligan. If it's like one of these cards, then I would maybe keep this as the sixth card. If the other five are all inkables, um, or are like all good items. Um, but yeah, inkables and Maurice Workshop works together well. Otherwise, you can mulligan them and try to get them off the queen. If you have a queen, you're a little bit more likely to mulligan this because you want to get it off the queen, and you want all three in your deck instead of only the two and one in your hand. Against some matchups, you will never have the time to play it, like aggro and red purple. So against those matchups, I would definitely mulligan it and hope for different cards like the Maui and the Vitalosphere. So Maui is basically only a keep if you need it for ink, if you have a good hand, or against red purple. It's a really good answer to Castle and a reasonable answer to Flynn in the late game, in the later stages of the mid early game. Um, the same goes for Vitalosphere. It's a reasonable turn one play if you have no better items, but it's mostly there to facilitate killing a castle ASAP, right? Or killing something that they quest with, like for example, they have one damage on their Sisu, and you play your own Sisu, and then Vitalosphere Sisu to kill their Sisu, or they quest with their their Flynn, and you can kill it with a Scuttle, for example. So those are these two are for the red purple match mostly, and then we have Sisu and Ice Block. These are mostly for aggro matchups. Um, Sometimes I keep a Sisu in mm, matchups against uh, in matchups that play Hiram, but that is basically only if I have enough inkables and I do not already have a brawl. Uh, and and I most likely want an ice block in my hand as well. Ice block is almost always a mulligan except against aggro decks, and you would kind of want both. Sometimes you can mulligan it if you do not have the Sisu. Sometimes it's just good if you have, let's say, you have two popsicles, so you can turn and you have no turn two play, no Scuttle, no LeFou. You can play turn one popsicle, draw a card, and then turn two play another popsicle and the ice block. So you have a, a reasonable turn two play because the ice block is always reasonable on turn two, especially if you have a Sisu in your hand. So these are the more conditional cards. And now we are going to talk about the least uh, likely to keep. And they are in order, with this being the most likely and these being always mulligans. So the reason why you would ever keep the crossbow, dragon, and the Tamatoa is for ink. Very sometimes, like, and this is like a 1% chance. If your hand is so good um, that you keep the crossbow and you will not ink it because you see that you're playing as red purple, for example, that plays a lot of Sisus, or let's say they play like a red deck with like three human Sisus or three of the inkable Sisu, then you could keep this. But most of the time you want to do different stuff on turn three, so it's basically your worst possible turn three play. Uh, but I would most of the time I would mulligan the crossbow, and the same goes for Maleficent and especially for Tamatoa. You don't really want to ink the Tamatoa ever, and the Maleficent is also not really what you really want to ink. Um, so um, I would mulligan these unless you have like basically the perfect hand of, let's say, Hiram, Popsicle, Queen, Scuttle, Shield, right? That's the best kind of curve you could have. something like that, and you need only inkables to make the hand good, then you can keep the Maleficent. Even then, I would probably still mulligan the Tamatoa because you kind of want all four Tamatoas in your deck and not in the inkwell. Then we go to the 4 always mulligan, and this always is in all caps. I would say 99.9999999% these are mulligans. They are not inkable, they're late game cards. For Sisu, it's the least mulligan of all the 99.999%. If you have a Sisu in hand, all the rest are all good inkables, and you play against a matchup where you want to shift this on turn 6. It might be keepable as well if you have a fishbone quill in that specific hand. Otherwise, you want to draw this later. Uh, for the lucky dime, you want to draw this with the scuttle or the queen later, and you do not want this in your opening hand because it just does nothing for like the first 9, maybe even 10 turns. So yeah, I would not keep this, and the same goes for Be Prepared and Medusa. Medusa is an inkable, which is it's the more useful and inkable of the two in an opening hand, but still I would want to draw these later. And Be Prepared is always mulligan because it can get hit by bare necessities, well, like your items, but fine, they might even always take the Be Prepared, and especially the Ursula, the 2-cost Ursula. And if you do not have a Be Prepared in hand, they have nothing to 2-cost Ursula. So if they play a turn to Ursula, uh, you are very ahead immediately because they spent their turn to not playing a Bucky and instead playing a Ursula that just looked at your hand. So that's kind of a mulligan guide for every single card in this deck. Um, as you've seen, I'm now playing a Maleficent. That's a little bit different. I will post the deck list in the description. This will be the new update. I'll try to test this, but I might just go back to Maurice instead of the Maleficent because I'm really liking the Maurice, but I've not tried the Maleficent before, and Maleficent is a good card. So thank you guys for watching. I hope this was a little bit useful, and I'll see you in one of my next videos.